Hello, dear children. I hope you must be hale and hearty. Children, today we are going to read an interesting lesson, that is Section 2 of Unit 3 Playing Ball of your English Oxford Inc. reader, The Chess Players, which is written by Munshi Premchand. Children, this interesting story depicts the decadent royalty of central North India. But before moving ahead, let me give you a quick insight into the life of this famous author. Dhanpat Rai Srivastav, better known by his pen name Munshi Premchand, was an Indian writer famous for his modern Hindustani literature. He was born on 31st July 1880 at Lamhi near Varanasi. He is one of the most celebrated writers of the Indian subcontinent and is regarded as one of the foremost Hindi writers of the early 20th century. Having mastered Urdu during his education in a madrasa, his early writing was in this language. Sauze Watan, a collection of short stories published in 1907, reflected the patriotic fervor sweeping the country. By the time he decided in 1914 to continue writing in Hindi, he was already a reputed Urdu writer. He began writing under the pen name Nawab Rai, but subsequently switched to Premchand, Munshi being an honorary prefix. A novel writer, a story writer, and dramatist, he has been referred to as the Upanyas Samrat by writers. His works include more than a dozen novels, around 300 short stories, several essays, and translation of a number of foreign literary works into Hindi. Premchand was not just a writer, but a thinker and social reformer as well. He was the first writer of Hindi fiction to introduce realism in literature. His works depicted the social evils of arranged marriages, the harshness of the British bureaucracy, and the exploitation of poor villagers by moneylenders and officials. Premchand's novels include Godan, Karmabhumi, Gaban, Eidgah, etc. He published his first collection of 5 short stories in 1907 in a book called Soz-e-Watan. In 1936, a few months before his death, he was elected as the first president of the Progressive Writers Association in Lucknow. So children, this is all about the writer Munshi Premchand. Now let us read the story. Children, now come to page number 99 of your Oxford Inc. English Reader, Unit 3, Section 2, The Chess Players. Let us first read the introductory passage that is given on page number 99. Most people have a hobby, an activity or interest pursued outside one's regular occupation, primarily for pleasure or relaxation. Reading, stamp collecting, blog writing, video games, and sports are some popular ones. However, when a hobby begins to dominate one's time, thoughts, and feelings to the exclusion of everything else, such as work, family, and meals, then we enter into the dangerous area of addiction or obsession. This can be harmful to one's health, character, and relationships. Discuss with your partner if you have ever known or read about a person whose life changed for the worse because of an unhealthy obsession with an idea, a person, or an occupation. Children, ponder over the problem how a hobby may turn into an addiction or obsession. How the life of a person took a turn for the worse because of an unhealthy obsession. We would be discussing the harmful consequences of all consuming passions in our online class. Now let us read the story. Let's examine the effects of an obsession with chess on the 2 principal characters in the story. Children, now let me give you a quick synopsis into this story. शतरंज के खिलाड़ी or The Chess Players is a 1924 Hindi short story written by Premchand. It is set around the life of the last independently ruling Nawab, Wajid Ali Shah, and concludes with the British annexation of the Nawab's kingdom of Awadh in 1856. The two main characters are the aristocrats, Mirza Sajjad Ali and Mir Roshan Ali, who are deeply immersed into playing chess. Their desire for the game destroys the competency of the characters and makes them irresponsible in their duties towards their families and society. They desire immense pleasure in developing chess strategies and ignore the real life invasion by the British. Their city Lucknow falls to British attackers as they are busy playing a game of chess. So let us now read the story. It was in the time of Wajid Ali Shah, Lucknow was drowned in pleasure. The big and small, the rich and the poor, all were sunk in it. Love of pleasure dominated every aspect of life. The state officials were absorbed in fun and pleasure. From the king to the pauper, all were engrossed. Playing games like chess or cards or ganjifa sharpens the mind, improves mental faculties, and helps in solving complex problems. Such arguments were being forcefully advanced. So if Mirza Sajjad Ali and Mir Roshan Ali spent most of their time sharpening their wits, how could any thoughtful person take exception? Both of them were hereditary jagirdars, free from the worries of a livelihood. They enjoyed their good food without having to work at all. What else could they do? Alright, it was the period of Wajid Ali Shah's reign, and Lucknow was immersed in a luxuriating gaiety. Everybody, the big and the small, and the rich and the poor, was enjoying the pleasures of life. Some took pleasures in enjoying dancing and music, while others found sublime bliss in the consumption of opium. Every activity in life was directed at seeking pleasure. An atmosphere of merry-making pervaded the government, the literary circles, the social sector, the realm of the arts, trade and industry, and conduct. Government officials were immersed in sensuous pleasures. Poets penned rhymes on love and parting of lovers. Artisans created the best artifacts, and businessmen did brisk business in collyrium, scent, and cosmetics. Everyone was intoxicated with the pleasures of life, and no one was aware of what was happening elsewhere in the world. What mattered most to people then were quail fights, partridge fights, or a game of chaucer or chess. Here, a quail fight is already in progress, while arrangements are being made there for the start of a partridge fight. Here is a chaucer board neatly laid out and awaiting the players, while there a fierce battle is already underway on the chessboard. There is an uproarious jubilation ringing all around. Everyone, from the king to the pauper, had this carefree attitude. Such was the situation prevailing then, that if a mendicant was offered money, he would buy himself some opium or liquor rather than bread. It was liberally expounded that games like chess and cards sharpened the intellect. These games helped to cultivate a habit of tackling difficult situations. These arguments were presented forcefully by their champions. Under such circumstances, if Mirza Sajjad Ali and Mir Roshan Ali spent much of their time in sharpening their intellect, why should any right-thinking person have had any objection? Both had large properties. They did not have to worry about earning a living. They had nothing to do. Alright, children, now let's read the second paragraph. In the morning, after breakfast, both the friends would spread the chessboard, set up the pieces, and engage themselves in the tactics of chessboard warfare. Repeated messages from inside that food was ready were ignored, and the cook was forced to serve food right there in the room as the two friends continued their play. Members of Mirza's family were far from pleased. Even the neighbors and servants made uncharitable comments. This is an inauspicious game and can ruin families. So both friends met after breakfast every day, and after laying the chessboard and arranging the pieces, would settle down for a battle of wits. The battle would turn so engaging that both of them would lose count of the hours. There would be frequent reminders from inside that lunch was ready. "We are just coming," would be the reply, but the two would make no further move to carry themselves to the dining rooms. Finally, the servants had to bring the dishes in the drawing room itself, and both friends found it convenient to eat and contemplate their next moves at the same time. There were no elderly persons in Mirza Sajjad Ali's house, and so the chess games were held in the drawing room. But other members of Mirza's family were not quite happy with this arrangement. If it were not just members of the family, but even neighbors and servants passed malicious comments. "This is a very rigged game. It ruins the home. God forbid that anyone else should become addicted to it. The game makes a person thoroughly useless. It is a terrible disease." Children, now come to page 100. There was great disorder in the kingdom of Awadh. People were being robbed in broad daylight. There was no one who cared. All the wealth from the countryside was being sucked into Lucknow. The blanket of debt to the English company was becoming wetter and heavier every day. Because of the absence of good administration, the taxes were not being collected fully. Nevertheless, months passed and the game of chess went on in Mir Sahib's Diwan Khana. The newest strategies were being charted. There would be arguments and accusations, but soon the two friends would be reconciled. Sometimes the game would be terminated midway, and Mirza Sahib would walk out and go home, and Mir Sahib would go inside. But the night's sleep would dissolve the last day's resentment, and the next morning the two friends would be back in the Diwan Khana. Children, an atmosphere of despair prevailed in the kingdom. There were daylight robberies, but there was no one to listen to the complaints of the people. Wealth from the villages was sponged away and found its way to Lucknow, where it was wasted on the pleasures of life. The kingdom's debt to the English company grew larger and larger with each passing day, owing to the complete absence of governance. There was a laxity in the collection of annual taxes. Everyone was intoxicated in life's pleasures. No one had ears to listen. A few months passed after the chess players began meeting in Mir Sahib's house. New moves were contemplated and fresh strategies were devised. There were occasions when the chess players quarreled and almost came to blows in the heat of excitement. But the two friends always made up readily. Sometimes the game would be abandoned midway over a disputed move, and Mirza would walk away in a huff, while Mir remained sitting at home. But after a good night's sleep, everything was forgotten, and the two friends would meet as usual at Mir's place in the morning, as if nothing had happened. One day, the two friends were mired in the quicksand of a game when an officer of the king's army came riding on a horse, asking for Mir Sahib. Mir Sahib was stunned. What was this? Why these summons? This was not good. From the next day, they would leave before dawn. With a small mat under their arms, holding a box full of pans, the two friends would make their way across the river Gomti to an old deserted mosque that had been built perhaps by Asaf ud-Daula. They would start playing, then they would forget the world. No other words except chess and mate would come out of their mouths. No yogi would be so focused in his meditations as these two. When in the afternoon they felt hungry, they would go to an eatery and eat something, relax for a while, and then restart their play. Sometimes they would forget even to eat. One day, while the two players were thus immersed in a game of chess, an officer of the king's army arrived on horseback and asked for Mir Sahib. Mir Sahib was horrified. What fresh trouble was coming his way? Why was he being sought? This seemed something sinister. From the next day, both friends started sneaking out of their homes even before the break of dawn, carrying a small mat pressed under their arms and a box of betel leaves, that is pans. They would make their way to a ruined mosque that had probably been built by Nawab Asaf-ud-Dawla. On reaching the mosque, they would quickly spread the mat, fill up their clay pipes, and begin playing chess. Once the game began, they forgot everything else, and not a worry in the world could trouble them. Barring a few words like check and mate, no other words escaped their lips. Not even the most devoted of the yogis could have shown so much concentration while meditating as these two did. When they felt hungry in the afternoon, they would go to an eatery and have their meals. After resting a while and smoking their pipes, they would enter the combat zone once again. Sometimes meals were also forgotten. Children, now let's read the last paragraph on this page. On the other side, the political situation in the kingdom was deteriorating every day. The company's forces were advancing upon Lucknow. The city was in a great turmoil. People were fleeing to the villages with their families. But our two players were unconcerned. They came out of their houses, passing through narrow streets, hiding themselves from the eyes of the king's men. Meanwhile, the political situation in the kingdom was turning for the worse. The company forces were marching towards Lucknow. There was panic, and people fled to the villages with their families. But our two players were least worried. During their sally to the mosque and back home, they had to make their way through narrow lanes. The only worry that troubled them was that they might get noticed by king's official and compelled to offer military service. So children, this is all for today. I hope you must have understood the first part of the story. So I would be coming again with the second part of the story in my next video. So till then children, take care. Thanks for watching.